All right. Well, this is Notes Towards a Metapoetics of Paranarratology 1, a 17-part reading, elaboration, and or interpretation of David Antin's Varieties of Rhetorical Deception in Narrative and Non-Narrative Storytelling. Part 12, Danger, Deception, Delusion, Dramatikos, eironicus, Dramatikos, anagnoreikos, who hopefully we'll get to today. If not, I'm hoping that this will be the either final or penultimate installment in this our 12th part of Danger, Deception, Delusion, Dramatikos, eironicus, Dramatikos, anagnoreikos, Daulis towards Delphi, and Donald's December Declaration toward the destruction of democracy. And as you'll recall, hopefully you'll recall, we finished a contract in phi through theta, finished recounting David's reading, elaboration, and or interpretation of Sophocles' version of the story of Oedipus in Oedipus the King. And now David is turning to the way that particular story is recounted. Or one could say that recounting itself is a reading, elaboration, and interpretation. So the way that story is read, elaborated, and interpreted by Aristophanes in his often overlooked and neglected The Smile of the Sphinx. And David begins by describing the scene at the outset of The Smile of the Sphinx, as it's constructed in the stage directions that Aristophanes provides for the outset. And the stage is entirely dark, David says. The stage is dark, and a bird, can be heard hooting in the distance, and this is, perhaps a reference to Athena's owl, David suggests, but perhaps it's some other nyctalope or night bird, that whose darkness, David explains, seems to be a reference, a kind of comical reference to the blindness of Tiresias. And then this darkness is not initially broken by light, but by a voice, and this voice is speaking to a friend of hers, apparently, but she calls out and she introduces herself, and she introduces herself as Diarmenia, which name means interpreter, and if you're a Greek, and you're familiar, with the mythology, you realize that Diarmenia is the wife of Tiresias, and in this darkness that perhaps represents the blindness of Tiresias. And perhaps is filled with these sounds of night that reference variously Greek goddesses of wisdom and warfare, and the shadowy domain, one could say, of the abodes beyond, these underworlds, perhaps, that Tiresias, as sacred hermaphrodite, has a relationship to. And then out of this darkness, it emerges this comical voice of Diomedea and the interpreter, and she says, apparently talking to a friend, no, I wasn't even there, and the whole time he was addressing the chorus, and he thought he was talking to me, David says, and at that moment, the light, slowly reveals the figure of Tiresias, and they're standing there on the stage, and behind them is a semicircle of the chorus, and the semicircle is only open in that space that allows the audience, from our position, to see fully the figure of Tiresias, and if one wanted to interpret, the partial circle of the chorus in relationship to the audience, then one could say that perhaps it represents a broken Ouroboros, and that the chorus has created this partial circle around the figure of the prophet, and sacred hermaphrodite Tiresias, in which he's revealed to us. So the construction, David says, is that Tiresias, believes that he's speaking to his wife, Diomedea, and the interpreter, and in fact, they are speaking to the chorus. But here, it's a kind of chorus represented as a kind of quasi, or pseudo parabasis, because in fact, the way that Aristophanes has designed, set up the rhetorical, right, construct here, that Tiresias is sort of playing the part, comically though, of the chorus in directing his discourse to us in the audience, directly, as the chorus would in a parabasis. But the comedy here is that he thinks that he's and then David goes back and forth and says, she thinks that he's addressing, but we're just going to say they. We've discussed the way that even though in this discourse, varieties of rhetorical deception in narrative and non-narrative storytelling, David, curiously has access to the future memory of social political events, at least beginning in 2016, and at least during that period from 2016 to 2024, he curiously doesn't seem to have access to the contemporary use of the word they, as a term, that can be utilized to refer to all types of non-binary self-identifications, either sexually or in terms of gender, or combination of sex and gender, or in relationship to self-understanding that recognizes the limits of this kind of binary situated, not only sex and gender, assignments of self-identity, but of assignments, that may belong to other, binary positionalities, binary positionings, right, of subjectivity and psychological, right, self-identification. So he doesn't seem to have access to that discourse or our contemporary usage, right, of that particular pronoun they. And so he keeps, once again, switching, back and forth between he and she, and him and her when referring to Tiresias. But as I did before, or as we did before, we can just utilize the pronoun they. So they're now clearly on the stage, and they have they're holding a staff. Tiresias is holding a staff, and you can hear Tiresias' wife in the distance, laughing, and she continues to laugh as Tiresias, narrates their story and addresses the, he thinks he's addressing his wife, Diarmenia. In fact, he's addressing the chorus, but curiously, the chorus also is displaced, right, in this semicircle behind them, and she is. I keep slipping back into, David's, oscillation back and forth, or crossing back and forth between him and her, and I wanted to remain somewhat clear and just utilize they, but I keep thinking about the way that that David narrates and recounts this story, and then when I do think about the way that David narrates and recounts this story, I keep, for some reason, shifting back into whichever particular pronoun that he is using to describe her, them, at whatever stage it is that he's recounting the story, and that's a problem of memory, right? Like that's a problem of memory in terms of relating, remembering to relate, a certain amount of the way that his experience carries the narrative, but then only under like the selectivity, right, of certain instances to recall that a kind of transformational grammar is being employed, to alter, the terms under which, his telling occurs, and those selective instances, right, in applying, that transformation of whatever it is, whatever pronoun he's using in that particular instance, whether it's, he or she or him or her, into the appropriate they or them, is because I suppose I'm also attempting to remember the content as he narrates the story. It becomes a little difficult to perform all of those operations of remembrance, which belong to different domains, right? Like remembering the way that David Antin narrates this particular story, as opposed to the way that I remember the way that the story is presented in Aristophanes. Is those are two sets of memories, and then remembering to perform this transformational operation on in relationship to the pronouns that David is utilizing is yet another circle or domain of memory, and so You have to, bear with us as we move along. But Tiresias is there on the stage, and he's emerged from darkness, and we've already heard this framing context that Diarmenia provides, and she continues to laugh right throughout their narration, Tiresias' narration, and discourse, which they believe, they're directing to Diarmenia, the interpreter, but in fact, as the representation points out, they are, or at least as Diarmenia's, verbal suggestion points out, they are in fact directing their discourse to the chorus. But the way that we see the chorus is as this, broken Ouroboros, behind them, and we seem to be right in this kind of like quasi parabasis, the direct addressee of their discourse, and all of this is, and perhaps the way that I'm describing it, David says, isn't as absolutely funny and ridiculously comical as it appears if you're actually there observing this performance. And one of the things that makes it comical, David points out, is this constant snickering on the part of Diarmenia, throughout the entirety of Tiresias' discourse, and their discourse is punctuated, you might say, by this kind of quasi, or pseudo parabasis is punctuated by this laugh track that the interpreter Diarmenia provides in the background, and then we understand that this laughter is coming from the subject, whose positionality, we essentially are occupy, like we're supposed to be in the place that she is, and so she's essentially right, like goading us to experience or through her laughter, right, like underscoring and articulating the relationship that the audience is intended to have, to the story that Tiresias produces there on the stage, and as the light increases, and we become aware of this figure, and we see them standing there with their staff, and then they begin their narration, and Tiresias begins, Diarmenia. He says, last night I found myself in the land of shadows. If only you knew how strange it was to have been there. And she says, and she says, right, but when she says it, right, she's moved from wherever she was off stage into the audience. So she's sitting there among us, and she says, "Oh yeah, why was it so strange?" And then she laughs, and then and he says, "Well, they say I had this dream," and she says, well, and she laughs again, and she says, well, well, what was it about? And they say, well, let me tell you. And they say it in this, this comically, but deep and mysterious way, comically deep and mysterious way. Well, let me tell you, and as they're standing there, about to tell Diarmenia, in the audience with us, the story of this dream. The light fades, and as the light is, fading to black, all we hear is, Diarmenia, once again laughing, and the light comes on again, and we see Tiresias standing there. But now they're holding a caduceus, and this caduceus is glowing slightly. Glowing, it has this golden glow that increases as the story goes on, that they narrate, and regarding their dream, and by the time that they're done narrating, this dream, which turns out to be the first of 3 dreams, David says. By the time they're done narrating this first of 3 dreams, David says, the only light, that we see, illuminating the stage is from this glowing, sort of golden caduceus, and the stick, the walking stick is gone. We don't know where it went, but it's gone. But presumably, they're in this dream now. As they're narrating it, they're situated within this dream, and the increasing, golden light of the glowing caduceus, seems to suggest this for us, and it's supposed to be beautiful, and kind of comical, at the same time, and we know it's comical, not only because we experience it that way, directly, but because we're guided in a certain way by Diarmenia's, laughing, and punctuating their Tiresias' narration, of this dream, as the golden glow of the caduceus, increases, and eventually, before the fade to black at the end of the first dream, becomes the only light, lighting the stage, and there they are on stage with this caduceus. And in the audience with us, Diarmenia, laughing, and a lot of us in the audience are laughing too, and the chorus is still there. The chorus is still there as this broken Ouroboros in the background. That hasn't changed, but you can't see them as well. At least not at the outset. David says, not at the outset of this first dream. You can't see them as well as you could, before we entered the dream, and when Tiresias was still holding their walking stick, right? And Tiresias, the stage directions for this are that Tiresias is supposed to stumble a bit as he's narrating this dream, and look out, but at the audience, but curiously, because we know Tiresias is supposed to be blind, but in this dream, apparently, in this dream, this first dream, he's not blind, and he narrates the dream in this way. He says, there I was, Diarmenia, at the crossroads, the triples, Emoxitoius, at Daulis, toward Delphi. And I was there and holding my caduceus. And she laughs at that point. You can hear her snickering in the background. And there I was, holding my caduceus. And the caduceus, at that point, Aristophanes suggests that they Mickey Mouse it a little bit there, and it glows a little bit, or it flickers. Maybe it flickers. Maybe, you know, like a candle flickering. It wouldn't be a light bulb going out because they didn't have light bulbs at that time, but maybe like a candle flickering a little bit. The glow, the caduceus, it flickers right there where he says, and there I was, you know, holding my caduceus, and I could see there at the Tripleus, Amaxitois, where decisions are made and unmade, and then David says, and it's kind of weird because we know they're blind, right? We know they're blind; they can't see. So they're describing this scene and what they saw at the crossroads, and it's interesting because in this moment, Tiresias seems to be unaware that they're blind. And he's seeing all this, but I guess he can see it because they can see it. She can see it because they're in a dream. And they're narrating the experience of seeing something there at the Tripleus, Amaxitois, the branch to Daulis on the way to Delphi. And I saw, as it were, Tiresias says to their wife, Diarmenia, 2 snakes in the road, one crossing from the left and one crossing from the right. And I was drawn somehow by the beauty and charm of these 2 serpents. And needed to watch the story as it unfolded. Diarmenia. And I confess to you that I was excited by the story and wanted to know what kind of a story it might be, and felt the eroticism of the experience of watching. And I wasn't sure if their story would belong to the muse Thalia or Melpomene. I wasn't sure if this were to be a tragedy of snakes in which one snake must die, or a comedy of snakes in which a marriage and mating might occur. But either prospect I experienced. And I experience now again, as I tell you, under the muse Erato, and then David says in the audience you can hear Diarmenia snickering a bit, and other members of the audience laugh a little bit as well, and he's narrating this experience from within the dream, and clearly he is re-experiencing all those feelings that that he experienced when she was there in the dream itself, and she was aroused by the prospects of watching, these snakes, and and they now re-experience, this the sensual and sexual pleasure of the experience of seeing, right? This form of scopophilia in relationship to the two snakes, right? That represent, the possibility of this encounter, and whether the possibility of this encounter is going to be this encounter of this narrative, possibility that lies in this encounter, David says. And this encounter between these two snakes is a good example of my definition of narrative, versus story. Because whatever it is, whether it's an encounter that in which one snake destroys and defeats another, and it's this engagement of conflict and aggression, or whether it's a sexual encounter, it represents it represents both of this potentiality of change and transformation on the part of each of the individual snakes, but also a change and transformation in the part of Tiresias' self-understanding in relationship to this experience, right? And his standing there in this, frozen under the conditions. She's standing there frozen under the conditions of this scopophilia, and she, and then we would say they are, bound, right, by the desire. Both they are bound by both the desire to understand the outcome of this incident. And to understand, which domain it belongs to in relationship to the muses, whether it belongs to Thalia or Melpomene, but they're also bound by their own desire and by the transformations, that these snakes, these snakes as Ouroboros, imply in relationship to their identity, and significantly perhaps changes in the relationship that they might have with Diomenia, if they are significantly to engage the terms under which such change might be possible. And these snakes, of course, are symbols of transformation as well as symbols of the mythos. And they belong to the symbol of the caduceus, David says, but in ways that are complex and variable and open to interpretation, open to the conditions under which they're viewed by the interpreter, and not just the interpreter, Diomenia, who is the interpreter, within the fiction, but the interpreter as we exist as an audience to this. And the fact that the fact that Diomene is sitting among us, makes all of this clear. And so he's watching with a lot of they're watching with a lot of she's watching with a lot of erotic interest, and part of the humor is that whenever her voice trembles or quivers, it does so in synchrony with the wriggling and the waggling of the two serpents on the stage. And she if she breathes in, or if he sighs, if they express, right, this interest, then then these two serpents, wiggle or twitch, or just and the caduceus, right? It flickers as well. And they say, and there was a point at which I could see, and I knew that the struggle these two serpents were engaged in was not one of love, but one of enmity. And David says, and it's that point where they determine that that the scene before their eyes, belongs to Melpomene and not to Thalia, and it's not going to end well. It's not a comedy in that sense, right? That ends happily in a marriage, but it's a tragedy that ends unhappily in death, and just as the smile of the Sphinx, in a certain way, in a certain way, you could say Aristophanes' choice, right? Aristophanes' choice, of the story of Oedipus and to express it as comedy was strange. It was strange in a certain way because we know that it ends in death and more than one. It ends, certainly in Yocasta's death, but it ends. It ends also in the death of a certain kind of relationship that Oedipus has to his his self-understanding as hero, and it's strange to take it in that sense as comedy. So when we think about the manner in which Aristophanes frames the entirety of this piece, of this story, as comedy, we have to come back to the title and understand perhaps in what way does this work figure in relationship to the other elements of Greek comedy and the structure, right, that was provided and delineated, that filled with these stock characters that we've talked about before. But he says, but for now, let's return to this scene in which Tiresias is unfolding their narrative, and they continue, to describe, the struggle, but they also, David says, describe like these feelings from within this dream of being, torn and guilty, and in a certain way, ashamed that they can't tear their eyes away from this scene, because they know somehow that that being there at the Tripleus Amoxitoas, the fork in the road, is a sign that they're supposed to intervene in the conflict, between these two serpents, who are clearly not engaged in the comedy of marriage and the eroticism of sexuality, but are engaged in this life and death struggle, and yet they can't tear their eyes away from this, and perhaps David suggests it's because Tiresias doesn't seem to be aware that they are blind, and they are experiencing this scene as if it were an ordinary occurrence of their typical, right, of their typical and normative ability to experience the world with their eyes, and this in fact is not the case, and so there's a certain amount of not knowing situated within the dream, David says, in which the blind seer does not seem to be aware that they're blind, to begin with, and does not seem to be cognizant of where the pleasures of seeing and watching the scene unfold, might lie, even though they're aware that on some level that the reason, perhaps the fates or the gods or whoever it might have been, that gifted them with the proximity to this scene, implicitly, was implicitly expected or demanded, right? Some kind of action of intervention, and there's a sense in which they understand that they're there for the purpose, right, of separating, these two snakes in their conflict from one another, and of stopping them, from engaging in what can only result, in death and the tragedy of this, right? They're like, in this sense, the caduceus is there as like the tool or the symbol of the mediator, and and as the narration, right, occurs, David underscores once again the light of the caduceus, grows brighter, which in some ways, may be an example of a kind of irony, because Tiresias is bound by their scopophilic interest in the relationship between these snakes, and can't intervene in the actions occurring in front of their own eyes, even though they know that their purpose is to do so. They feel it, right? And they feel guilt and shame, like a deer in the headlights, for being unable to do so. And they stand there, and at this point, at some point, David says, the light, goes out again, and the caduceus flickers, and when we come up. And when they come on again, and we're in the same dream. We haven't moved on to the second or the third dream yet. David says, but we're in the same dream. But at this point, we actually see, presumably, something like what Tiresias saw in their dream, and there are these, two serpents on the stage, and these two serpents are engaged in what at first might appear to be this erotic sexual entanglement, but they dance through various shapes. They dance through the shape of the circle, and then what appears to be a kind of Mobius strip like configuration, and then they dance through various various kinds of geometric forms, one of which represents infinity, and some of which represent different relationships to different muses, and it's all very elaborate and complicated, and at each transition, Tiresias' wife in the audience, sitting there among us in the audience, snickers, and at one point, she begins, calling out, like making requests, like triangle, or parabola, or that certainly contributes to the comic effect of the scene as well, and so at a certain point it isn't as necessary for Tiresias narrate the entirety of what he sees, verbally, because we see it, they're with him, and these snakes, in this scene are very well trained, and how the Greek comedy, trained these serpents to engage all of these, different figures and shapes and perform, in such a way. That's lost to us today, but we can trust the notes of the historians under Clio that, in fact, that these were extraordinarily, well trained, actors, and however they did it, which we don't know, but however they did it, we do know that it wasn't merely a description, provided of the activity of these serpents, but they actually perform these actions, and we know this because the stage notes for Aristophanes, make this very explicit, and the instructions for the dancers, provided in the stage notes, which are the instructions for the dancers, which are provided, in Greek, include instructions for excuse me, this is me losing my voice, not David's. David doesn't lose his voice here. I do. I'm going to take a sip of coffee and see if I can get back on track. The instructions for the dancers in the Greek text include, instructions for the serpents, as well as for the chorus and for the other, members of for the various stock characters in the comedy, and so we know this occurs visually, and we know how it's presented in the Greek comedic theater, and then he comes back, to the narration of the story. So we're watching all of this unfold, and Tiresias' wife, interpreter, Diarmenia, is making comments, and sometimes the serpents will respond to her comments and make whatever symbol that she calls out, and sometimes they won't, and so there's also a certain amount of anticipation in the discrepancy, between what her suggestions are, and whether they'll be realized, by performance of the acting snakes on stage at that moment. And then one of the it turns tragic, and violent rather quickly, and suddenly one of the serpents murders the other, and then Diarmenia, Tiresias' wife, breaks out of her laughing, and suddenly becomes horrified. And from the audience, she cries out, she gasps, like, David does it a lot better than I do, because he doesn't cough comedically, after he does it. He just does the gasp, and expresses the shock that Diarmenia feels when she sees this one snake killing the other, and realizes perhaps that this is no longer a comedy in this particular moment. This is tragedy, which is kind of weird because it's occurring within the domain of comedy and under the authority of Thalia, and so she gasps, and at that moment when she gasps, right, the lights fade to black again, and recall that when the lights fade to black again, at this point, because of the way that the stage directions and the lighting directions are designed, that what's fading is the glow of the golden, caduceus, because at the outset, as I mentioned, David says that there were stage lights, ordinary stage lights, directed from beyond the stage, but as Tiresias narrates the dream, those stage lights dim and are replaced by the glow of the golden caduceus, right? And so at this point, the only light on the stage is the golden caduceus, and then suddenly, when Diarmenia gasped, and then stepping out of David's character, you can see that I did it, better this time and didn't, choke, and so that's more like the way that David did it the first time, and then that's more like the way that David did it the first time, and then. And when she gasped that way, and the lights suddenly cut, it's the caduceus. It's the caduceus that suddenly goes out, right? And we're left there in the darkness, and suddenly Diarmenia isn't snickering anymore. She's just silent, and then we hear Tiresias again, but speaking from within this darkness. It's completely dark, and they say, and then Diarmenia, after I observed the consequences of my failure to act. And as I stood there frozen, watching the action unfold and allowing the one snake to kill the other, though full knowing that my duty and my obligation there at the Tripleus and Moxitois, at the fork in the road, at that place where decisions are made and unmade, where lives are changed and lost, that narrative fork in the road, he says. David Antin's it's kind of like a little self-advertisement at that moment. The way that David kind of replugs that narrative idea. And it's not in the original, that when he says narrative, that's not in the original Aristophanes. That's not in the text. Tiresias monologue here, directed directly to the audience, sort of, but really intending to be directed toward Diarmenia. And so let's go back to the story, and let's go back to David's recounting of it. And he says, and we're in the voice of Tiresias. So they're saying to Diarmenia, and after after I allowed myself to see all of this without acting, without intervening, I turned away and began wandering home. And all of this that David says is being spoken from the darkness. And Diarmenia at this point in the story remains silent. And it's only Tiresias that you can hear, and only their story is told, from as a voice, from this darkness. And Tiresias, continues narrating, and as I wandered home, in the darkness, and as it grew darker, and as my thoughts grew dimmer, And as I pass that place where the Sphinx resides and questions one's worthiness with her riddles, I wondered, they say. David says, I wondered, they say, whether my powers of prescience would now provide my journey with the safety required to pass the guardian of such secrets, suggestions, and sagacities. And David says, and this is all fancy language, but what they're essentially saying is, because they didn't act and separate the two snakes, now they question whether they're going to be able to solve any further riddles, and whether the gift of prophecy and sacred hermaphroditism, even belongs to them anymore. Because and recall, like, they're in the darkness there, and why isn't the caduceus glowing? And then they say. And then they say, and in that moment when I questioned and doubted my wisdom, I heard a thunderclap from above. I heard a thunderclap in the darkness, and I wondered why I had heard the thunder before I had seen the lightning, and I questioned this. Why? And then finally, in this scene of darkness, and from the darkness in which the audience is situated, in which Tiresias is situated on stage, you hear Diomenia, and she snickers again. And presumably she's laughing at this idea of, like, hearing the thunderclap without seeing the lightning, and because it's funny, right? Because they're blind, right? Tiresias is blind, so, like, how would they see the lightning? But it's funny because they don't seem to know that they're blind, and that's funny, right? Because of that disparity between the, like, the sagacity and wisdom of the sage and the ignorance, to one's own blindness. And so she snickers at this, and they say, and I wondered, why it was that I heard the thunderclap, but I did not see the lightning. And then, how Aristotle has that thing about, the way that, the way that things can be revealed in tragedy in particular, but, in other forms of, drama as well, where, they can be revealed, through logic, operations of logic, and they're kind of like modus ponens kind of thing. There was a man from Corinth. The man from Corinth, was a shepherd. There was a shepherd. The shepherd from Corinth was, the guy who knew about Laius. That's that. So Aristotle has this, like, little thing because he's a scientist and a rhetorician and a logician in a certain sense, right? And there's different ways you can reveal stuff. Like, you can run the expository, or you can show it symbolically, or you can refer back to a memory. But the best way to do it, right, is through this logical operations. And then David breaks out and says, I did a poem with these logical operations one time, where I would say, some lizards have tongues, all tongues, are made out of, green cheese, therefore some lizards are made out of green cheese. And I was playing, around with these syllogisms, right? Like and I based this piece on this Lewis Carroll piece that he based on syllogisms. But here, Diomenia, he says, it is kind of like laughing at this, because, like, he gets into this thing where, like, okay, so light is faster than sound, and I just heard thunder, so where was the lightning? And it's funny because he's blind and he wouldn't have seen the lightning, but he doesn't know that, so you could make another syllogism out of this. Like, well, all augurs and prophets are sages. All sages are smart. So all sages know that if they're blind, they're not going to experience lightning. And this is the kind of thing that she's laughing at, and perhaps is being referenced by Aristophanes in this particular moment, in the play as well. And another thing that contributes to the awesome comedy of this piece, right? All right, so she's there and in the audience with us, and she's snickering, all the while, and we can't help, but snicker, along with her, even though, in a certain way we feel sorry for Tiresias, because they're there and they're trying to figure out, why it is that they just heard this, thunderclap, and they didn't see the lightning, and then in this moment, in which she's snickering, and presumably, Tiresias is standing there with his caduceus, trying to figure out, why he didn't see the lightning. Then a light emerges on stage, but it's and this light, that starts to emerge on stage, so that we can now see Tiresias and see that they're standing there, like wondering about, where this thunder came from. It doesn't emerge from the caduceus, like maybe we were expecting it to emerge from the caduceus, but there is no caduceus anymore. They're standing there on the road, kind of like struck by this problem, like, why didn't I see the lightning? And then what we see is that they're standing there with the walking stick, that we originally saw them with, when they weren't in the dream, and then in the light, we can now see Tiresias, and they say, and then Diarmenia, and then Diarmenia, it struck me that the reason I didn't see the lightning was because I'm blind, and I don't see stuff, and she in the audience, with us, laughs again, right, and then she makes a comment, to the audience. And she said, "There's a lot of stuff he doesn't do," and the audience, laughs back, and then correcting David, she doesn't actually say that. She says, there are a lot of things that they don't do, and but David. David, in a certain way, and this is an aside, not an aside, on David's part, but aside on my part. But David, in a certain way, he's stuck within, this binary construct of male and female, gender dynamics, in the same way that Alan Capra was, and he might not have, I'm not saying that David, just like Alan Capra, if I had written, the pronoun, she in a paper on Yoko Ono, would have corrected it and said, it's a convention to utilize he. Maybe not. But if I had utilized, at that time, and this was really before we had, these emergent, new, right, new usages that help us, to get out of this binary thinking, but like the pronoun, they, but had I, used a pronoun other than he or she, he might have, noticed it and called it out, for its, grammatical, lack of fidelity, or we could say infidelity, grammatical infidelity, right? So depending on what, on the context, of the event the event moment that he's narrating, like he'll choose either the pronoun, he or she or him or her, to relate to what his psychological understanding is of the narrative at that particular moment. So because the character Diarmenia, is a woman, is female, identifies as a woman, and she's criticizing, right, at that moment in the audience, and that she's criticizing Tiresias, and maybe, right, maybe making a kind of subtle reference to their sexual relationship, indirectly. Then David will choose the pronoun that fits the context in which the maximal amount of humor seems to emerge, right? And so this is a kind of like perhaps it's a Jackie Gleason moment, right? Or a moment in and what I mean by a Jackie Gleason moment is perhaps this is one of those sort of binary husband wife canned gender moments that you would see in 1950s comedy for David, or that's the way that he interprets the potentiality for humor here, and whether his choice emerges unconsciously or consciously. It emerges from context in which the relationships between and the gender dynamics organizing the kinds of failures, right? Failures in relationships that might contribute to comedy, because it certainly isn't examples of success in human interactions that give rise to the comedic elements that we experience under Thalia, but rather the failures, right, of those ideals or expectations or commitments or whatever they might be that define the terms of the relationship in whatever moment they're being articulated. And so in that moment, and this is just a framing of perhaps some of the dimensions under which the selection of a particular pronoun to describe Tiresias occurs in David's articulation of this story, and the way that it becomes part of his storytelling, right? And it becomes part of the storytelling under the terms that he understands the conventions of the genre of Greek comedy and the expectations of genre of Greek comedy, but also of his understanding of his own world and what he brings to Greek comedy, because there might not have been such a comedy of gender, although there is clearly in Aristophanes and other examples like Lysistrata, which this digression has already become long enough, and I won't continue and discuss how Lysistrata in a certain ways is very different, obviously, from the Honeymooners, but in a certain way it plays upon like the understanding of these kind of like binary gender terms and which are part of the story of Tiresias themselves, right? Like there's the story in which like this cast of characters, Zeus as played by Jackie Gleason, as Ralph Cramden, and as and Hera as played by Audrey Meadows, as Alice is Cramden or Crandon, I can't remember. It doesn't really matter, but go to Tiresias because they know that to solve this argument, because they know that Tiresias has experienced sex in both of these ways under both of these physical positionalities and conditions of not just psychological experience, but of but of the phenomenology of the physical experience, and they ask them, to solve this problem. And of course, Tiresias's answer, to Ralph and Alice and Jackie and Audrey and Zeus and Hera, in this kind of like binary, gender comedy, is of the 10 parts of, because it goes back to him. That's really funny. And then he corrects himself and he says, because he's, I mean, she's, and then he says, because why does he say, she at this point? Well, presumably, he started as he, because he favors, the idea of women's pleasure, and Hera gets mad about that, but then he realizes that because he's favoring the idea of women's pleasure, that he's probably doing it from her, so she, right? And anyway, so we can get around all of the confusion, just by saying they. So David says, and he stumbles on this part. He says, he, and then he switches to she in this moment. But we'll just say they, right? All right. So they say, of course, and this is familiar, of the 10 parts of pleasure experienced in the act of love, only one belongs to the male, and the remaining 9, belong to the female. And of course, in 9, in the 9, because they are a seer, they're making reference not only to the 9 muses, the 9 original muses as daughters, whether they're the daughters of Memne or the daughters of many other more primary or primordial muses, and because it's Tiresias, they probably realize that, and they are a seer. They probably realize that not all of the muses are the daughters of memory, right? But David underscores that elsewhere, but not here. This is kind of our side, but his his stumble once again plays into the whole problem, right, of the gender binary that becomes in a certain way partially interrogated in Aristophanes' comedy, although it gets played out in fairly complex ways as it moves around and moves from characters like Tiresias to the Sphinx, who could be said to be the ultimate hero survivor in a certain sense of the smile of the Sphinx. And he says, and why she's smiling, we'll get to hopefully, but perhaps not here. We'll finish up the digression, and then we'll return back to the dream. But the digression finishes with Tiresias' answer, and they say, of the 10 parts of pleasure, which belong to the act of making love, 9 of these belong to the woman, and only 1, belongs to the man. And then as part of this digression, we'll also note that the 9, of 10, additionally, in addition, to referring to the 9 muses, may refer to the 9 forms of Ma Devi, or the nine forms of Durga, and the reason that Tiresias would know this, even though they are a Greek, is that they are a Greek, but they are also a sacred hermaphrodite and have access to wisdoms, right, that belong to this kind of parabasia and transgressive border crossing of ontological domains. For example, like domains such as the underworld and whatever veil or gate or door, if you prefer if you prefer the idea of regarding a door to regarding a gate or a veil, they have a certain ability to transgress, right, these walls, and that is perhaps why they are engaged in this kind of quasi parabasic although it's humorous, engagement, with the audience, and in a way that only the chorus, in Greek comedy, should be able to do. But because, right, because they're gender crossers, border crossers, because they are sacred in the sense that they can move, beyond, right, the expectations of these inscribed domains, and have a certain amount of like transgressive freedom. They can take on characteristics that belong to the chorus or belong to a different domain of ontological reality, or that transcend, right, the limitations of this kind of honeymooners binary gender comedy that informs the question itself, coming from Zeus and Hera. All right, so let's try to get out of this digression and back into the dream. And David says, all right, so where we are is we're in the dream, and the light has returned on the stage, and Tiresias is standing there contemplating why they didn't see the lightning, and we see now that Tiresias, is no longer, holding the caduceus, but is, holding their ordinary, walking stick, which they were holding, you recall, before they began narrating the events of this dream, and now the expression on their face is somewhat, different, and their mouth is open, and they're sort of like staring out at the audience, but it's clear that they can't see anything, and at the moment that it's clear that they can't see anything, and we can see them, but they can't see us, and so the reciprocality of our blindness is gone, right, and at that moment, in which we realize that they are blind, they say and then I realized that I didn't see the lightning because I'm blind, and then then once again Diarmenia, from the audience, sitting with us, laughs out loud, guffaws, and says, didn't I tell you? And then most of the audience, laughs, with her in that moment, and then we see Tiresias, feeling their walking stick, and realizing that their walking stick, is not a caduceus, and then after, and this is kind of comic too, because we see them doing it. And so we don't really need them, to narrate this fact. But then after they do it, then Tiresias says, and then Diarmenia, I realized that my caduceus, was no longer a caduceus. and then Diomenia from the audience, once again, retors, I told you. I told you their caduceus was not, a caduceus, and then something like that, and then the audience, laughs, with her again, right? And as he's narrating, his realization, that the reason that he didn't see the lightning was because, and this is David, again. Again, getting the pronouns wrong, and he switches, and as she realizes, that she didn't, and he's going back and forth, as he realizes, as she realizes, as he realizes, as she realizes, as he realizes, as she realizes, and we'll save we'll save our audience the trouble of traversing all of the dynamics of why this pronoun is chosen versus that pronoun is chosen here, and just say they, as they realize that why they didn't see the lightning and before they heard the thunder, and as they realize that their caduceus is no caduceus but an ordinary walking stick, and they realize that they're blind. At that precise moment that they realize that they're blind, they trip over a rock. There's a rock, because in this scene that has that has emerged through the lighting that doesn't belong to the golden glow of the caduceus, because the caduceus, it can't be, because the caduceus isn't there, right? And if we wanted to do that Aristotelian logic thing, we could say, well, the stage can be lit. Some stages are lit by a caduceus, and some stages, all stages that are lit by a caduceus, are golden light stages, and then you could say, this stage, is lit, by outside lighting, and then you say, well, anyway, and David doesn't complete it, but he makes again a passing reference to this subset of work that he did in the volume Meditations, that was based on a kind of take on Lewis Carroll's play with syllogisms as a poetic form that belongs to this volume Meditation. So he makes another reference to that, and he makes it in relationship to Aristotle's Poetics, right, which you'll recall is not about comedy but about tragedy. But when in that section where Aristotle's talking about the way that things can be revealed, and it's really about like the ways that things can be revealed in the anagnoreikos. And so in a certain way, in a certain way that it relates to this moment in a way that is both relevant and comical, and both relevant and comical because David needs to turn back and kind of plug his own work in what he accomplished in the Meditations. But let's go back to where we are in the unfolding of this particular moment, and the stage is now lit, and in that moment, when we see Tiresias coming to their self-understanding of their own blindness, and their self-understanding of why they didn't see the lightning, and the understanding of the not knowing. All these not knowings like occur at the same time, right? I'm blind. This is why I didn't. See the lightning, but I heard the thunder. I'm walking on this road. That caduceus was just part of a dream. I'm a figure, and maybe they come to some kind of understanding of themselves as a figure in a dream. Who knows? I mean, I don't know how deep the understandings are, but there are all these like anagnoreikos that occur together, and there's a kind of peripetai, and the peripetai is in a certain way, like the operation of fate and change, like, is represented by a rock that we can now see, like, that's in the path of Tiresias. But we know, and this is, an example of Dramatikos eironicus, right? Dramatic irony. So we know that, although it's not in Greek, it's not called Dramatikos eironicos, but but it is for us now, and we know that what's going to happen, and so we're watching him, as he stumbles towards this rock, and he keeps stumbling toward the rock, and maybe it depends on your audience, but what's interesting is that Diomenia, doesn't call out. She doesn't say, watch out for the rock. She doesn't tell him. She doesn't tell him. Sometimes there might be an audience member who does. It's like, Tiresias, watch out. There's a rock in front of you, Tiresias. And if an audience member does call out, Tiresias, there's a rock in front of you, watch where you're going, then generally, that gets a good laugh. So if people, if the demos, a lot of the demos has seen this performance, before, and it wasn't this way in Greece, but maybe it was this way later, in some other demos. Because, in Greece, these were like annual comedy competitions, right? Thalia occurred under this muse, you could say that, that there was another muse, that resided over both Thalia and Melpomene, right? And in a certain sense, that muse was related to, the muses of play. And that muse, belonged to the idea of competition, or contest, or agon, right? And agon, if you had a really good performance and it was a really good piece, then you won the competition, and if you didn't, you didn't. But under later terms of the experience of this particular comedy, in which you might have a demos, and they might be Greek or they might not be Greek, but it's not a one-time performance. But maybe they've seen this performance before. Maybe it's a stage on Broadway, and they're doing, for whatever reason, Broadway has decided to do this performance of Aristophanes. And there's a lot of members of the audience that have seen this before. And in this particular demos on Broadway, they're familiar not only with the story, with the mythos logos, but they're familiar with this the way that it's presented in Aristophanes and the smile of the Sphinx, and they're familiar with like what goes on, and from this audience, in which a lot of members of the audience are familiar with the way this is done. Often someone will call out, Tiresias, watch out! There's a rock in front of you! Don't fall! And then that gets a big laugh, and usually if that happens, right? Usually if that happens, whether the actor is actually at the rock or not, like the actor will take the cue and take the timing involved in that punchline and fall. Right, and that's when the lights go out. So there has to be a lot of coordination in that particular moment, because you, in a certain way, you don't know how the audience is going to respond. You don't know who's going to be in there in that audience, and you want the contingencies, right, and the kind of the occurrence, right, to coincide in a way that's natural to the unfolding of the relationship between that particular moment. And the structure that's predetermined by this piece. But in any case, whether someone calls out, Tiresias, there's a rock in front of you, be careful that you don't fall, or not, like that once he does reach, and then I'm back in David again, and he says he, and he probably says he here because he's being chivalrous, and he doesn't want she to fall over the rock. So he's allowing he to fall over the rock, but he doesn't want she to fall over the rock. But the truth is that they fall over the rock, and when they fall over the rock, whether they've been warned or not, right, then the lights go out again, and we realize that this falling, whether it resulted in an actual death, or merely a symbolic death or a symbolic slip, is a kind of is the kind of punishment that is a kind of peripatetic punishment or turn or change, right, that coincides with all these anagnoreikos, involving light and realization of blindness and of the dream itself, and that coincides with the reminder that you experienced all of these visual pleasures, and probably because you don't usually have any visual pleasure, because you're blind, but you sacrificed your role as a mediator, right, and in a certain sense, caretaker, of life and the sacred. And these snakes, could have easily been separated, and we're reminded, and then we're reminded in the second dream, to an even greater extent, that the story of the separation of the snakes and the relationship that Tiresias has to the caduceus is of great significance, right? And we'll get to that, and then I'll step out here and just say that we'll get to that in the next segment. But clearly, we've only gotten through the first dream. So the lights come back on again, and we understand that whether Tiresias actually died in the first dream or merely tripped, and that stumble merely symbolically represents a kind of failure and punishment for failing to intervene in the conflict between these two serpents. We understand that they have emerged, right, from the dream state, and there are a number of signifiers and symbols within this, and David mentions each of them and discusses their symbolic values, but each of them within this unfolding. I have to go back because we're reaching the end, and I don't want to get that blue screen. So. The first signifier that we've emerged from the dream, is the fact that it's not the caduceus, that's glowing, and the reason that it's not the caduceus is glowing because there is no caduceus in this scene, and we're back in on a stage that's lit, by lighting other than the golden glow of the caduceus, and Tiresias is holding their walking stick, not their symbol of medicine and of messenger ship that the caduceus would represent, yeah, I was just waiting for the white screen, and the focus to return to David here. Wait for that moment. There we are. And so we don't need to be reminded or told that we've emerged from this first of Tiresias's dreams, and that we're back in the rhetorical space of this figure, this character, this prophet, telling their wife Diarmenia, what occurred in this dream and what this dream means. It's the fact that they're holding a walking stick. It's the fact that the lighting, for the scene is produced, from an outside source, and it's a fact, and we're aware of the fact because they don't seem to have suffered any consequences from this fall that they took over the rock and into the stumbling into the audience the way that they did in the dream. And from this position, they express to Diarmenia the following, and that was only the first part, Diarmenia. That was only the first dream. I was visited by 3 dreams, and this was merely the first of them. And she laughs once again, and at this point they begin narrating the occurrences of the second dream, and David, and I'll break out again. And David continues there, and can continue there because he has more time. But I've unfortunately, frittered, my time away, stumbling over, my memory of the story and the way that, David recounts it, and so, once again, we're going to have to defer the remainder of David's recounting of the smile of the Sphinx and how and why it differs from the way that the same story is told in Sophocles until further readings and readings, interpretations and elaborations that we perform, and I've begun, referring to all of these segments, even when they pass, well beyond, the course of a meal or the bijective, relation that they're supposed to have with the diegetic space, right? That's defined by part 11 in David Antin's diegetic world, that he refers to as danger, deception, delusion, Dramatikos, eironicus, Dramatikos, anagnoreikos, Daulis toward Delphi, and Donald's December declaration toward the destruction of democracy. And there's supposed to be a bijective function that defines the numerical value of David's part 11 and our part 12. But whatever bijective function but whatever the terms of that bijective function are, they exceed the metaphor of a multi-course meal as a representation of a class period, and as we've discussed elsewhere, and therefore however long it takes, and we've only managed to account for the first of 3 dreams, which is all within, basically all within the first scene of the first act of Aristophanes' comedy, The Smile of the Sphinx. And so I have no idea how long it's going to take me to recount the entirety of The Smile of the Sphinx, as it's presented, by David Antin, in the 11th section of Varieties of Rhetorical Deception in Narrative and Non-Narrative Storytelling, and as it is intended, to exist in, bijectic functional relationship to our part 12, of his part 11, danger, deception, delusion, Dramatikos, eironicus, Dramatikos, anagnoreikos, Daulis towards Delphi, and Donald's December declaration toward the destruction of democracy. But clearly, and as we've mentioned before, we're off track, and being derailed, if being off track, is, and being derailed, are, in some way, shape, or form equivalent, and can be used as, to express this idea of being out of sync numerically. We'll just continue calling however many installments it actually takes to get through recounting, reading, elaborating, and interpreting David Antin's reading, elaboration, and interpretation of The Smile of the Sphinx, which is, of course, Aristophanes' reading and elaboration and interpretation of the story of Oedipus. However many sections that it takes, or segments, or discussions, or class periods, or multi-course meals, it takes to complete, this rendering, we'll continue to simply call it part 12. So when we begin again and pick up with the second of Tiresias' dreams, we'll be, once again returning to Notes Towards Metapoetics of Paranarratology 1, a 17-part reading, elaboration, and/or interpretation of David Antin's Varieties of Rhetorical Deception in Narrative and Non-Narrative Storytelling, Part 12, Danger, Deception, Delusion, Dramatikos, Eironicus, Dramatikos, Anagnoreikos, Daulis toward Delphi, and Donald's December Declaration toward the Destruction of Democracy. And I have formally added, and I'll add once again here, in America.